Hi guys, welcome back to Snakes and Adders, and a very happy Chaz, as we are going to do a species that I have wanted to do ever since this series began, but we need to wait for the right sort of example to come in for us to be able to make a decent video with it. So this is episode 46 of Snakes and Adders Introducing Series, and we're going to be discussing the grey-banded king snake, Lampropeltis alterna. Quite possibly a snake that can not only take it to the corn snake, but for my money potentially kick it around the parking lot as well. It's got the temperament, it's got the colours, it's got the appetite, it's got the overall adult manageable size. This is the complete package for a beginner snake. I mean, just look at it. What an absolutely bloody phenomenal snake this is. The bee's knees. This snake was once banded in with the Mexican king snakes from what we used to call the Mexicana complex, namely Lampropeltis mexicana, the nominate form, which was the San Luis Potosi king snake, Lampropeltis mexicana greerii, which was the Durango king snake, and Lampropeltis mexicana theri, which was the Nuevo Leon king snake. They've all now been elevated up to their own full species. So these are now Lampropeltis mexicana, which is the San Luis Potosi king, Lampropeltis greerii, which is the Durango king, and Lampropeltis leonis, not theri anymore, and that's the Nuevo Leon king snake. The grey-banded was the first one to be elevated to its own species, though, and became Lampropeltis alterna. First described by Brown in 1901 as Ophibolus alternus, it was moved to the genus Lampropeltis as Lampropeltis alterna by Stejneger and Barber in 1917. 1950 saw it reclassified by Fleury into Lampropeltis blairii, which is a name that we will discuss again later in the video. And then it was introduced to the Mexicana complex, as we've just gone through, with the three then subspecies of Mexican king snake, Mexicana, by Galebach and Baker in 1962. Then returned to Lampropeltis alterna by Conant and Collins in 1991. Two types of grey bands exist within the hobby in natural form anyway. There is Blair's phase, which is what I'm holding here, and then they have between 9 and 17 saddles. This one's actually got 17, right on the money. And the alterna phase, which has between 15 and 30 saddles and vastly reduced gaps within the saddles themselves. The saddle width is far thinner and much more reminiscent of the Nuevo Leon king snake. For a while, they flirted with separating these two distinct colour forms into separate subspecies, namely alterna and alterna blairii, but then reverted to considering them morphs of the same snake. Interestingly, though, there does seem to be a specific geographical distribution for each type. A type locality was allocated for each of the two forms. Type locality for Blair's phase, which is this one, is Terrell County, Texas, with the remainder of the distribution through southwestern Texas, northern Coahuila. Mexicans, put me right, please. I don't mean to offend. Mexico. And then the type locality for alterna phase is the Davis Mountains, Jeff Davis County, Texas. How cool must Jeff Davis have been to have a county named after himself? I think we need to rename South Yorkshire Chaz Thompsonville. No, I'm only kidding. So yeah, the type locality for alterna phase is the Davis Mountains, Jeff Davis County, Texas. The remainder of the distribution again through southwestern Texas, Chihuahua, western Nuevo Leon, Durango, and northern Zacatecas, Mexico. This species is noted as occurring from 670 meters to 2,286 meters in elevation, thus meaning that the harsh and unbearable heat of the lower desert forest floor is left beneath them. But that's not to say they escape the heat completely. They still have some pretty harsh temperatures to be able to move around. And the altitude can create other issues with far cooler winters and the need to brumate. The habitat of choice includes elevated desert flats, rocky hillsides, escarpments and canyons. This rocky terrain is great for security and also for escaping the occasionally harsh, dry daytime temperatures and the cooler nighttime lows. If weather becomes increasingly inclement, they can, in either direction, whether too hot or too cold, they can retreat to the safety of these fissures and cracks to be able to maintain a balanced temperature. In captivity, we tend to provide them with a vivarium with the minimum measurements of 90 by 45 by 45 centimetres, but preferably 120 by 45 by 45 centimetres, or bigger in some cases for adults. If you insist on using a racking system, then the minimum that I would bear would be a 50-litre box that you'd use for one of these. Rudimentary heating style could be using a heat pad. This species has been kept in captivity for a long time and has successfully bred and been maintained on this style of heating. Not that I'm necessarily recommending it, but we can't rewrite history. And the reason that this guy exists is probably because parents were bred on heat pads. Modern techniques, however, dictate that we should try and offer heat from above, warming the air and creating basking platforms that absorb the heat. All the heaters, irrespective of type or application, must be used in conjunction with a reliable thermostatic controller and a thermometer to be able to monitor the thermostat's performance at controlling the desired temperatures. Coupled with this, more and more keepers are now opting to use lighting to enrich their snakes' lives, and this could be using a low output UV light system such as Arcadia's Shade Dweller, or just opting for a full spectrum light operating at around 6,500 Kelvin, which is the full spectrum. You know, you could grow live plants underneath that light. Substrate should be shifting and dry, and it could either be beech, aspen, hemp or lignocell. Or if you wanted to use a pseudo-naturalistic type, you could use a soil and sand particulate mix to recreate that semi-desert biome. You could use cork flats and cork tubes around the tank as well as rock pieces, but these must be supported and structurally sound so that they cannot slip and fall onto your snake and damage them. Strip branches can also be utilised, and this snake will actively climb. In keeping with biome, foliage should be kept stripped back and a basic affair with maybe just a few small sprays of colour to brighten up the tank. In certain cases, a moss box or damp cave may be utilised by the snake, particularly when shedding, and this is less applicable to racks, which are inherently muggier and don't breathe quite as well. The water bowl generally doesn't need to be big, just big enough to place the head in and have a drink, particularly if we're going to be using a moss box. The risk is it may raise humidity higher than required when combined with the moss box, so just large enough to have a drink from. Basking temperatures generally oscillate between 29 and 31 degrees Celsius. Smaller tanks should operate at a slightly cooler basking temperature so that the cool end still drops off adequately. Larger tanks can have a slightly elevated basking temperature as the snake still has the means across the length of the tank to escape to those lower temperatures. Nighttime lows can safely drop to between 21 and 23 degrees Celsius at the warm side, with cooler temperatures available at the cool end. This may seem at odds with the desert locale, but this is down to elevation. Remember, these snakes have a median elevation of 1,478 meters above sea level. Feeding is rarely, if ever, a problem, and as long as you buy from a reliable source, this animal will have been long established before purchase. For newborns, though, occasionally lizard scenting may be required to get them going. Some babies can also be reticent to get going at all, and some keepers have found success brumating the babies before they've even fed. This is down to the breeder and falls to the responsibility of the breeder. At no point would we recommend a beginner introducing themselves to reptile keeping would take on that responsibility. So you would expect the breeder to be able to provide you with feeding records to show that the animal has established and is doing well in captivity. Do not inherit a problem snake and request the feeding records. Once established, you are generally off to the races. The feeding issues are less commonly seen than they used to be, and with many people successfully breeding this species over many generations, they are becoming easier with each generation and are settling and adjusting to captive life. This, after all, is the largest of the Mexican king snakes at 4 feet long, so any problems will be fleeting and isolated basically to the youngsters or males that are fasting because it's breeding season, which again is just normal behaviour. Breeding will occur in spring after a relatively deep brumation period, and these snakes at this elevation are very exposed. The brumation ensures a good sperm count in your males and makes sure that we're guaranteeing a fertile litter. A clutch of 4 to 8 eggs is laid in spring with an incubation temperature of 28 to 29 degrees Celsius being fine, and hatching will usually occur 55 to 65 days after being laid, and you can just use a generic mix of 4 parts vermiculite to 1 part water as the substrate for you to hatch the eggs in. So let's have a quick look at climate data. Oh, and we'll also look at distribution quickly as well. So distribution, this is from ICUN Red List. This is Lampropeltis alterna distribution. Now, I've just sort of roughly drawn circles around this map as well. So, you know, those of you that are super into king snakes, I haven't, you know, necessarily done it super accurately, but it's just to illustrate where the other 3 subspecies of Mexicana came from. So you have Mex, which is San Luis Potosi Kings, which is the flat part of the bottom. Then we got the Nuevo Leon king snake here, which is now Lampropeltis leonis. And then we have up here the Durango king, which is Lampropeltis greeri. So this is Alterna's description, although in other texts that I've read, it's a far more sporadic and dotted affair. And on another scientific paper, I believe by Burbrink, it also highlighted that actually there is no overlap. They don't overlap at all 4 have got completely separate ranges. So we took 3 different localities. We took Jeff Davis County, Texas, Terrell County, Texas, and Ciudad Juarez in Chihuahua, Mexico. So they have a elevation of 1001 meters, 854 meters, and 1190 meters respectively. And we took their average monthly daytime high, average monthly nighttime low, and their rainfall. Rainfall is pretty nondescript, doesn't really feature too heavily in this. It's not something that we'd be over concerned with. The wet season wouldn't be the trigger. It would be the temperature changing that would be the trigger, and more than likely the circadian rhythm. So you would change the amount of light that the animals have access to. So maybe if you have one of these new stats that controls when lights turn on and off, you'd be able to cycle that down to maybe 8 hours in midwinter and 16 hours of daylight during the summer, and that way they're using that as a trigger as well. Temperatures for daytime high average working from January onwards: 15, 18, 23, 27, 31, 36, 35, 35, 31, 26, 20 and 15. So these are pretty sharp ramps that we've got with our plateaued summer in the centre. And, you know, we're getting down to around that sort of 15, 16 degree mark here during the day. So pretty cool. At night, we can see that there really is a deviation. You know, it's really dropping off, and that's down to cloud cover, tree cover. This place is exposed, so it's just plummeting off. We're getting down to sort of your minus, the average is 0 in January, 3 in February, 7, 11, 17, 21, 22, 22, 18, 12, 5 and 1. So, you know, these are, this female actually is heavily pregnant. She's due to give birth any moment. She won't be going anywhere until she's given us the eggs. And at which point we're now moving 2 months on from here. So if we're now in the sort of mid-March, we're going to be getting the eggs. We'll be incubating. They'll hatch out. We want to get as many feeds down them as possible if we can. If not, then we have to brumate them, because with this sharp fall off, if 10 degree line there is the line at which we say that most snakes are going to be going into brumation, they're not bothering coming out, then potentially these animals would be spending the better part of 3.5, 4 months at far lower energy levels and probably not eating, and just maybe coming out for occasional basking during those daytime highs, but not really having the time, because they need to escape back down into their burrow where it's a bit more clement, and they're not going to get overexposed with how cold it gets. It's really hard to overstate just how good a snake a grey banded king snake is. When I was a kid, the tricolour kings and the Mexican kings were all the rage. They were the bomb. Everybody wanted them. And then corn snakes and their genetics explosion happened, and then royals came. And these guys have really fallen by the wayside, and it is woefully sad. These snakes are amazing. And if you get the opportunity to keep one, seriously, they are full of personality. They haven't got this edge that some of the North American king snakes from the Getchula complex have got. They're laid back, they're chilled out, they're just wonderful animals. And honest to God, you could do so much worse than keep one of these. This is like a 95% perfect snake. I know corn's probably only about a 96, but we've got so much choice out there, and diversity is everything. And without us working with them and encouraging you to keep species that are as mind-bogglingly beautiful as this grey-banded king snake, then they're going to just disappear. Now, kings have got their own select group of people that like keeping them, but such as your Mexicanas and the grey-bandeds, these are perfect for beginners. They're just the right size as adults, and you just don't miss out. You get the opportunity to keep one, get one. You will not regret it. We'll be back with more videos soon. Me and Paul, as always, really appreciate your continued support. I need to put my teeth back in. I'm tripping over my tongue at the end of this now. We'll be back with another video soon. Actually, one of his neighbours, we're hoping to try and do a video on the Trans-Pecos rat snake next. So, all going to plan, that'll be the video that we produce. We'll see you all again soon. All the best, guys. Cheers.